Good morning. It's 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. I really do. A strange one. I think the more engaged you are, the more plugged in you are to politics, the harder it is to distract yourself at the moment, the harder it is to focus upon anything else. But I think it's important to try. I think the story that probably rang truest and also took me most by surprise this weekend was a comment piece by the associate editor of the Daily Telegraph. I'll say that again, the associate editor of the Daily Telegraph and one of their most prominent columnists, which essentially existed or appeared under the headline, Project Fear was right all along. 6 years of policy confusion and ineptitude has brought a calamitous loss of standing, which is, I mean, evidently and obviously true, but to see it in the Daily Telegraph on the 15th of October 2022, I have to confess, knocked me sideways. Downbeat predictions by the Treasury and others on the economic consequences of leaving the EU, contemptuously dismissed at the time by Brexit campaigners as Project Fear, have been on a long fuse, but they have turned out to be overwhelmingly correct. And if anything, pay attention, this is not a drill, and if anything, have underestimated both the calamitous loss of international standing and the scale of the damage that 6 years of policy confusion and ineptitude has imposed on the country. I have to apologise to you. I predicted a week or so ago that these people would start demanding that we never mention Brexit again. I thought that the inevitable clutch of reality, the inevitable realization of the scale of the damage, harm, catastrophe that they have knowingly, willingly inflicted upon the United Kingdom would demand a sort of ostrich approach to the B word. I honestly believe that the most disingenuous and dishonest Brexit supporters would be calling by now for us to stop talking about it. Oh, you've got to move on. Why is everybody still talking about it? So credit where credit is due to Jeremy Warner, associate editor of the Daily Telegraph. He stared the calamity squarely in the face and described exactly what some of us have been describing for the last 6 years. You may sense from my tone, from my voice, the Times also, Matthew Said in the Times also wrote a brilliant piece about the inextricable relationship of our decision to remove ourselves from the largest free trading bloc in the world with the weakness that we now have when it comes to matters fiscal and matters economic. And there's a piece in today's Times, Rupert Murdoch's Times, by James Kirkup, which makes it, I mean, ineluctably clear that there is absolutely no way that you can account for the scale of the disaster of the last 2 weeks without including the ludicrous decision to leave the European Union in 2016. You now have a Prime Minister and a Chancellor of the Exchequer who campaigned against Brexit, albeit that Liz Truss subsequently underwent a supposedly Damascene conversion on the road to Downing Street. And you sense from my tone, this is not something to celebrate, which is why today we're going to take a break from the normal run of things and we're going to break one of our own rules and we're going to talk about feelings, because I want to know what you feel. I think the reason why that is going to be the right course of conversation today is because it is now impossible to cling to the idea that what has happened over the last month is anything other than utterly and completely disastrous. Today, we are going to see something that we have never seen before. We're going to see a Chancellor of the Exchequer announce a complete abandonment of policies which got the current Prime Minister elected as leader of her party and by association as Prime Minister weeks ago, not years ago, but weeks ago. In the time it takes for, I mean, what happens normally in the space of a month? And it's not even a half term at school. The time it takes for your average football club to play 5 matches, maybe 6 matches, the British government is about to abandon every single policy that essentially defined it just 1 month ago. And it's very hard to know what to say in terms of analysis or critique. It is very hard to know what to say in terms of coverage or reportage because this is unprecedented. The scale of this catastrophe is absolutely unbelievable. And it is, again, important to remember that not that long ago, i.e. a month, all of the people responsible for inflicting these harms upon our country were cheering Liz Truss to the rafters, the Daily Mail. And you have to check the dates sometimes. September the 24th, 2022. I'd remind you that the date today is the 17th of October, so not even a month ago. At last, a true Tory budget. And then on September the 26th, 2 days later, Kwasi's boost for families. These newspapers that turned you against High Court judges that sought to persuade you that decent politicians had no place in our democratic structures have turned in 3 weeks from cheering it to the rafters to describing it as almost certainly the death knell for Liz Truss's premiership. At last, a true Tory budget. You have here a man called Mark Littlewood, who is the head of that bizarre organisation, the Institute of Economic Affairs, that is officially an educational charity and yet refuses to reveal who funds it and finds itself invited onto more programmes than Stacey Solomon, if you were to keep a rough tally of who's popping up on the telly and the radio. He said just less than a month ago, I'm extremely encouraged by what I've heard. Asked to give that mini budget marks out of 10, he gave it 9. How long before he pops up on your telly again, or indeed on your radio? Nigel Farage, you remember him, the fellow with the Fisher-Price binoculars who goes down to Dover to rub his thighs at the sight of desperate people steaming into the country on flimsy dinghies. He tweeted, today was the best Conservative budget since 1986. I think he meant 1988, but intelligence, knowledge, and indeed consistency have never been his strong points. A chap called Julian Jessop, an economist for Brexit, another denizen of the so-called Institute of Economic Affairs. The initial reaction from most economic commentators and in the financial market has been a loud boo. There are some things I would have done differently, but the overall strategy is sound and sentiment should recover as the economic benefits become clearer. These people are doolally. Gerard Lyons, another economist for Brexit, who reportedly was someone that Liz Truss valued the counsel of. This was a serious statement by the Chancellor. He not only reaffirmed his desire for a pro-growth policy agenda, but highlighted the focus on the supply side and on boosting investment. This is key to raising trend growth. It was necessary to reverse the corporation tax increase. They're reversing the reverse of the corporation tax increase. That's already been announced. And the national insurance tax rise, both of which were negative for growth. These measures were already discounted and account for the bulk of the fiscal easing announced today, as following figures show. Can you be more wrong than these people? And then, I'm afraid the man who, if there were a crown to be awarded for abject public idiocy, this fella would probably get it, although I've said it before and I'll say it again, he's only the second stupidest person ever to have edited City AM newspaper. Alistair Heath, also in the Telegraph. Sit down for this bit. This was on the 23rd of September of this year. I'd remind you again, it's not even the 23rd of October yet. It's just under a week away. This was the best budget I have ever heard a British Chancellor deliver by a massive margin. This man gets paid for his opinions, just like I do. He gets paid for his analysis of the news, just like I do. He gets paid to tell you the information that he thinks you need in order to make informed decisions. The tax cuts were so huge and bold, the language so extraordinary, that at times, listening to Kwasi Kwarteng, I had to pinch myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming, that I hadn't been transported to a distant land that actually believed in the economics of Milton Friedman and Hayek. This man still gets paid for his opinions. Still going to be drawing a cheque from the Daily Telegraph. And I don't think we've finished yet. I think we've got a few more. You remember Lord Frost, the man who negotiated that Brexit withdrawal and then sought to disown it before the ink was even dry? He wrote, what an excellent statement from Kwasi Kwarteng. Proper tax cuts, reforms in the pipeline on infrastructure and enterprise, a focus on growth and improving our economy's productive capacity, and all delivered with huge intellectual confidence. These people were watching the same events that you were watching, that we were watching together. They were crunching the same numbers. They were listening to the same noise. And they concluded that black was white, that up was down, that the moon was made of cheese, that unicorns had finally arrived. They concluded that reality didn't matter because what they wanted to see was so overarching and so profoundly believed in that the strength of their convictions and their ludicrous cultish beliefs could somehow redraw the rules of reality itself. By insisting that something was true when it obviously wasn't, they could make it true. by denigrating and insulting and abusing those of us who've spent years quietly pointing towards reality, quietly insisting that light is better than dark, quietly explaining why these people were talking undiluted bilge on a highly paid and daily basis. They were vile to us, and now all of their chickens have come home to roost almost at exactly the same time, and almost by poetic coincidence, just as Brexit begins finally to completely fall apart in real time and full public view, so Donald Trump's utter depravity, the seditious nature of his conduct in the run-up to January the 6th is becoming undeniable and crystal clear in America, where, thankfully, the determination to cling to the carcass of corruption appears to be much more popular than it is here. Nobody, as far as I can tell, is clinging to the carcass of Liz Truss's premiership. And of course, some people will seek to separate it from the inevitability of recent events lying very much in the shadow of Brexit. But the idea of the Conservative Party as being responsible, as being trustworthy, as being fiscally sound, as having the first idea what they were talking about has been exploded for a generation. So why don't I feel happier? Because I live here, and I love this country, and I never want to live anywhere else. I never have wanted to live anywhere else, and I hate what I see. And the shallow schadenfreude of vindication, the small frisson of delight, perhaps, that you feel when you see some of the people responsible for inflicting this upon us all recognise their folly, or at least acknowledge their mistakes, doesn't fix anything. It doesn't undo anything. It doesn't matter how many times you can scream, "I told you so," from the top of the highest mountain in the country. It doesn't undo the damage that's been done. And I can't think of a better distillation of the last 6 years than the fact that today a Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer will seek to restore a modicum of stability to the United Kingdom's economic situation by completely dismantling and disowning policies announced by his own government less than 4 weeks ago. Pause and think. This is not normal. This is what happens when the ruling class is permitted, largely by a supine and sycophantic media and a gaslit population, to detach itself from observable and objective reality, to abandon truth, to denigrate evidence. This is what happens. You prioritize belief over fact. You prioritize opinion over expertise. You prioritize demagoguery over evidence. This is where you end up, with somebody standing up full of vim and vigor, full of confidence. You just heard my recollections of those cheerleaders describing it as being intellectually incredible and confident. All of these people, all of these vampires who sucked the blood from the body politic of Britain over the last 6 years, cheered this aberration to the rafters. They'd have carried Kwasi Kwarteng through the streets on their shoulders that weekend, even as the pound had a fit of the vapours. They claimed it would soon pass. But it doesn't, because they have rendered us small. They have rendered us less relevant than we have ever been before. And they have done it on the promise that it would make us stronger, that it would make us great again. They've withdrawn us from a massive global economic bloc, which leaves us absolutely blowing in the wind of market forces while claiming that they were taking back control. They have sacrificed everything. They've bet the house on a promise of growth while still being beset by senior members within their own ranks who are diametrically, psychologically, pathologically opposed to immigration. So we're going to have growth while we reduce the number of workers that can come into the country. They've bet the house on a xenophobic, jingoistic fever dream, and they've lost the lot. And you want a mark of how absolutely ridiculous this has made us? Jeremy Hunt is coming to the rescue. Jeremy Hunt is coming to the rescue. The man who presided over possibly the worst period in the history of the National Health Service. Patient satisfaction in the NHS was at a record high in 2010 when David Cameron came into Downing Street, and not long after. It was Andrew Lansley for a while. Jeremy Hunt took over, and look at the state of the NHS today. Just pause. 1 million members of the NHS contemplating going on strike. Waiting lists as long as your arm. People hemorrhaging out of the service because the conditions in which they work are unbearable. Hospitals that are dirty. Staff that can't do anything about it because they haven't got time for a cup of tea. Never mind to do some of the things that would have been their duties long before Jeremy Hunt took up the reins as Secretary of State for Health. Jeremy Hunt is coming to the rescue. Well done. Well done. With your enemies of the people front pages, and your Steel of the New Iron Lady, and your I Love Ramona tears, and your Tufton Street fetishes, and your programmes full of preening popinjays who never reveal who actually pays their wages but pop up on the BBC and LBC and ITV and Channel 4, their columns in the Murdoch newspapers, their columns in the Telegraph, banging on about how we need less regulation and more growth, when what they really mean is that people don't deserve protection. People don't deserve rights. There are no rights, you know. It's not a right if someone can take it away. It's a privilege. And they don't think you deserve them. And we've spent 6 years treating them like sages, like royalty, like unchallengeable arbiters of public good. And this is where they've brought us all. Not just themselves. They've brought us all to this. And Jeremy Hunt is coming to the rescue. So how are you feeling? 0345 6060 973. As you can probably tell, I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't think sangry is a word, is it? Sad? Vindicated? What, 4% if it was a pie chart? 4% vindicated? Keith, you won't need the tin today. The I told you so's are so far now in the rearview mirror that they're not even worth revisiting. How are you feeling about this? 0345 6060 973. And remember, the mantra of this programme since June of 2016 has been this: contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. That's breaking now, because if you're still clinging to the carcass of this catastrophe, I'm afraid you're closer to con man than conned. But if your feelings this morning are informed by the knowledge that you contributed to this, you voted for this, you supported this, you're more than welcome, and you always will be, on this programme to talk through where you are now and what you're feeling today. But I think the days of contempt for the con men or compassion for the conned are pretty close to over now. Because if you're looking at what you've done and trying to persuade yourself that it's a good thing or not your fault or not remotely linked to the skip fire of the last 6 years, then finally, I think my compassion and my patience is now exhausted. Because you've done this to all of us. Every single one of us, and our children are going to suffer more than we do. You've even abolished their freedom of movement and told them to celebrate. And Jeremy Hunt is supposed to be the saviour. 25 minutes after 10, I may be wrong, but speaking solely for myself, I found it very helpful, even perhaps cathartic. How are you feeling this morning as you look at the skip fire that constitutes the last 6 years of British politics now really burning out of control, and Jeremy Hunt is turning up with a fire extinguisher that we have to all hope is effective, and the early signs are good. But the idea that you secure a political success by undoing what your own government announced fewer than 4 weeks ago is probably the perfect illustration, the best illustration we will ever receive of how completely broken British politics has become as a direct consequence, obviously, of Brexit. Sarah is in Bath. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I'm shaking with anger. I'm so angry about not what just has happened in the last 10 days, but the sort of verging on criminal irresponsibility of this Tory government. And I think we have to have a general election. I think people who are much, much worse off than me, but I've seen in the last 10 days,
Yes.
10% wiped off my pension pot. And there's this complete denial by the Tories of any responsibility for what they've done. I feel as if we've all been the victims of a cruel experiment, and there's not even any recognition that they might have had something to do with it. So I am literally shaking with anger and very distressed.
I understand what you're saying, and it's big of you to acknowledge that other people will be hit a lot harder. But a 10% hit to your pension is your plans, your
Yes,
the road ahead.
exactly.
And although we know that it's subject to the vagaries of economic ebb and
Yeah.
flow, you don't expect it to be kebabbed by your own chancellor or your own prime minister.
Exactly. And, I'm sure I'll manage. And
Sure.
I do know that I've got other advantages, but that's not the point. It's the cruel way in which they're playing with people's lives without any recognition of a sense of responsibility. There's no empathy. There's no, it's just complete denial.
That's beautifully put. Where does that come from? Because I do, I use these phrases sometimes glibly, but I use them frequently for a reason. They have a heft to them. I do this for a living. My face is right up against the screen every day. And the only explanation I can come up with is that they surrounded themselves entirely with people that agree with them, and not in the sycophantic forelock tugging way that Boris Johnson surrounded himself with people who just prioritised telling him what he wanted to hear above everything else. These people genuinely did believe that they were announcing something special, something amazing. That's why I ran through all those cheerleaders, from Mark Littlewood at the IEA to the front page of the Daily Telegraph to Gerard Lyons to I don't think we include Farage. It doesn't really count as a valid contributor to anything except for being wrong about it all. And Julian Jessup, all of these people, somehow Downing Street didn't hear any dissenting voices is the only explanation I've got. And that's almost unbelievable.
I think it's become a completely incestuous bubble of
crikey, there's a phrase. Yes.
Of think tanks and media and short-termism, and it's just sort of fueled itself. It keeps fueling itself.
And they've got it.
That,
They've got what they dreamt of. That's why the cheerleaders were so exuberant. It's why it was always worth going back to. They're not even a month old. They thought that this was the new dawn. They thought this was the promised land. They thought this was the road to riches. And they've seen what happens when their ludicrous vampiric ideology is placed front and centre in a country that has denuded itself, that has diluted its power, that has reduced its own status deliberately as a consequence of a democratic vote. Thank you, Sarah. How are you feeling is the right question to ask today, because it's a human reaction to a political catastrophe, an economic catastrophe done deliberately. And that's why, if you're struggling, I don't think anybody is, the links to Brexit, just off the top of my head, I'll give you two. Number one, everybody who thought the budget was brilliant, Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget was brilliant, everybody whose critiques I've just run through were huge Brexit cheerleaders. And number two, one of the main reasons, or at least a major reason why we are so blown in the wind of market forces is precisely because we are out on our own and we're not part of a major global bloc. So we're a lot more susceptible to market forces. Getting spooked by Kwasi Kwarteng wouldn't matter so much if we were members of the single market, but getting spooked by Kwasi Kwarteng when we are sovereign, if you like, you want to use that stupid word, means that they lose complete faith in an entire government, and they don't have the confidence of thinking, well, at least they're in the single market, so they're not going to be able to go too far off the cliff edge before they get hauled back. Just two simple observations that I appreciate some people will still be struggling to both understand or admit. 10:31 is the time. Holly Harris is here with the headlines. 35 minutes after 10, and it may not be the most important. Well, it's clearly not the most important thing going on at the moment, but I think it's important to bear in mind, to remember, Boris Johnson is in the process of ennobling many of the key contributors, the ones that he hasn't already put in the House of Lords. The arsonists who have set fire to our country are still being put in the House of Lords by Boris Johnson. That is a mark of the madness. That's a mark of how low we've been brought by the vanity of people like him and the stupidity of many of his colleagues. You actually get a seat in the House of Lords as a reward for having done to the United Kingdom what the last few weeks have shown us, shown us exactly how good an idea it all was. Ruth's in Mount Boers. Did I say Mount Boers in Essex? How do I pronounce that, Ruth?
You pronounce it Bewers.
Mount Bewers, is it, in Essex? Very smart.
Yeah.
What would you like to say?
I listen to you every day, James.
Thank you.
But I've never rung in before. But there was a word that you used that really lit a fire in my head this morning about feelings. How does this make you feel, this current chaos? And Jeremy Hunt and all the shenanigans. Yes. And I can sum it up really in 2 words: helpless and frustrated. Yeah. Because what I really want to do, I want to have my say and I want to vote. But I'm not being offered an opportunity to do that with a general election. And I don't understand why not, because none of this has a mandate. None of what has gone on in the last 10 days has any permission from any of us. And I'm just very, very frustrated at where we've got to and why we've got here. Yeah. And the fragility of a system that has allowed us to arrive at this point and just watch the car crash unfold day after day after day. And what's coming today with Jeremy Hunt's announcement is going to be horrendous. I'm not expecting any crumb of comfort by anything he says. I mean, he's there to stabilise the markets, but I mean, we're talking about real people. That isn't mentioned often enough. I mean, he mentioned it yesterday, but I honestly don't believe he'll be putting real people at the top of his agenda in any way.
I mean, it will be better off when he's finished than we were before he began, and the markets, the gilts are already pointing in the right direction, because it's as if you've removed a drunk from the cockpit, and the plane is still in peril, but it is no longer piloted by somebody whistling Dixie while all the alarms go off in the background and insisting that everything's going to be fine. And that's not really a mountain in front of us. It's a brave new world of glorious opportunity. But the damage that's been done to the country doesn't get undone. The soft damage, the question of stability, and that's why that beautiful phrase you used, the fragility of our system, has been exposed in similar ways to the American system. Although they stepped back from the brink on January the 6th, they didn't drive a different sort of chaos, a different sort of nation-damaging chaos. It didn't actually get pushed over the edge. It did here when Kwasi Kwarteng delivered that mini budget. It was the culmination of things. It wasn't a departure. It was the culmination. This Singapore on Sea, this deregulation, this get rid of workers' rights, tear up the red tape. This was a dream for them, not a mistake. That's the bit I can't understand either, Ruth.
No, it's just terrible. The other thing that isn't talked about very much.
Go on.
The drain on the public purse, which is very uppermost in Jeremy Hunt's mind, where he's going to be doing cutting. The number of MPs that get massive payoffs when there's a reshuffle or a sacking. I mean, what's Kwasi Kwarteng going to walk away with? Because he's left his position, and all the others who were doing it for 10 minutes, they'll get thousands and thousands of pounds, as a reward for failure. That's the other thing that's not talked about. What I would really like to hear from Liz Truss in her resignation speech, if she ever gets there, I want to hear her genuinely say she was wrong.
Yeah, that's the point.
And that they never do that. I mean, the press conference was an utter disgrace.
I've never seen anything like that. I mean, there was a moment where she was like a meerkat on Mogadon, wasn't there? As her head just moved around slowly, and she's desperately looking for a journalist who's not going to ask a question that's too difficult, pretending she could look through Beth Rigby from Sky News and settle instead on some Herbert from The Sun. But even they, in circumstances like this, have to ask difficult. There's only one question to ask. How can you get rid of your Chancellor for delivering on your own promises and hang on to your job yourself? It was pathetic.
Absolutely. And she told us what she was all the way through. She said, I'm not the slickest of communicators, but my God, it actually matters, your presentation and your communication skills. And that's why Jeremy Hunt looks as good as he does, because he can communicate these horrendous thoughts in a slick way.
Well, he seems. I mean, he's a dreadful politician and a very odd human. I say that only because of my own encounter with him a few years ago when he refused to sit down for the duration of an interview. But that's just an illustrative anecdote rather than anything of particular importance. But he at least appears to inhabit something like the reality that the rest of us recognise. And you mentioned not admitting they were wrong. I was praising one Daily Telegraph writer at the top of the programme earlier. Here's another one, someone who, again, I don't know whether he lives on Button Moon or down a sort of Alice in Wonderland type rabbit hole. Someone called Tim Stanley has written, Liz Truss is the victim of a very British coup. Deviate from orthodoxy and you'll be crushed by the Remainer expert-driven establishment. This is like somebody who promised the world was going to end up on Tuesday. He's woken up on Wednesday morning and has to deliver a sermon. It's incredible. Incredible.
It is. What can we do?
I don't know.
Help.
Well, I mean, I did write a book about this 4 years ago, but it's fair to say that the country as a large didn't take my advice, Ruth, and start ignoring client journalists, remove all of these think tanks from public discourse, move experts back to the centre of British politics and stop paying attention to xenophobes and weirdos who pop up on Question Time more often than David Dimbleby. But it's never too late. It's never too late, Ruth. Kathy's in Plymouth. Kathy, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling angry.
Yes.
I'm feeling that Britain is impotent. We should have some mechanism by which we can sanction this government for what it has done through all the Johnson years and this present fiasco.
That's the impotence of it. I mean, that's part of the system, I suppose.
We have nothing. We cannot. They don't even say they're sorry.
No, they don't say they're sorry.
They've got too much pride and smugness to even say sorry.
Well, on the other hand, perhaps she has been the victim of a very British coup. As Tim Stanley writes in The Telegraph, deviate from orthodoxy and you'll be crushed by the Remainer expert-driven establishment. This has got nothing to do with international markets or economic reality. It's a Remainer establishment-driven coup. Kathy.
Well, I hate to tell you, but this morning on the Jeremy Vine show, there was some other idiot from the Telegraph, Chris someone, who was advocating that this is the time to bring Boris back. Oh, and people were ringing up and agreeing.
Yes. Well,
after all he's done, the crimes of his 2 years or whatever it was.
I'm very, very wary of talking about cults and Jeremy Hunt in the same sentence for reasons that I hope are obvious, Kathy. It's fair to say that Keith's finger is hovering above the dump button even more cautiously than it usually does, but the behaviour you describe is entirely cultish. Boris Johnson today, if he was still in power and he had presided over this fiasco, he would now be genuinely trying to claim that the abandonment of 3-week-old policies, if it did steady the markets, he'd be doing a lap of honour. You remember how shameless he was about things that happened entirely by accident or things that hadn't happened at all, but he would seek to claim the credit for. If Jeremy Hunt succeeds, and I think he will for the record, in at least temporarily calming the waters, Boris Johnson would be pretending he'd had nothing to do with the announcement less than a month ago and everything to do with the thing that's undone some of the damage done by the catastrophe he inflicted on the country a month ago. And Liz Truss doesn't have the shamelessness or the charisma, depending on which word you prefer, to even try that, which is perhaps why the true believers, the absolute cultists, will be calling for the original high priest to return, because he's the only one that can keep reality away from their dreams and their mythologies.
I don't want charisma.
No.
I want atonement. I want someone to pay. That's how angry I am.
Well,
and we need a mechanism. I don't know, the king is just as bad, so we can't ask them to do it.
He's not as bad. Don't make me go all royalist. He's not as bad as this lot. At least you know roughly where you stand.
I mean, he's not squeaky clean, is he? So,
no.
yeah. I mean,
so where is our leadership? Where does it come from?
They brush it under the carpet, and they're allowed to do it.
That's the point.
And I want someone to say, no, we cannot have this.
I'll do my best. But we are small voices, you and me, Kathy, albeit that if there are enough of us, we become loud. But I'm afraid, and it pains me to say this because it's taken me years to fully appreciate it, but it is this profession that has much of the blame, much of the responsibility for this lies with British journalism, what passes for British journalism. Loads and loads of good people, some of my best friends, colleagues, past and present, doing their best. Some absolutely part of the corruption. Some people I've had to share studio space with, absolutely complicit in this. And not just the obvious sort of racist demagogues, but the people insisting that Brexit was going to be a good idea while not understanding anything. It's all there. It just gets handed down from on high. You can't work for the Barclay brothers or Rupert Murdoch or the rest of them without towing a certain line, and you don't waste enough energy. You don't waste any energy at all trying to understand what's right and what's wrong. You just say what you're required to say as loudly as you possibly can. And then you end up in the House of Lords like Charles Moore for being a loud enough advocate of all of the madness that's been inflicted on this country since 2016. And now Johnson's trying to put Paul Dacre in the House of Lords, the man that literally wrote front page headlines designed to denigrate everybody from High Court judges to democratically elected politicians. Who elected him? Nobody. In fact, he had a problem with the House of Lords when it was doing its democratic duty and properly scrutinising Brexit-related legislation being handed up from the House of Commons. He was calling it for it to be abolished, I think, around about that time, just like Claire Fox was. And she sits in it now. That's the corruption that we're talking about. That's the denigration of decency, the utter abandonment of values. So you could disagree passionately with somebody 10 years ago. You could even hate some of the stuff that they stood for, some of the stuff that they represented. Think back to austerity, the ludicrous idea that an international global crisis was A, Gordon Brown's fault, and B, something that could be fixed by closing libraries in Wolverhampton. You could have passionate, violent, verbally violent disagreements, but at least you all agreed about the colour of the grass on the pitch you were playing on. You look at some of the stuff. Look at Rory Stewart, right? And the frustration he feels. He's almost traumatised by his experiences in British politics because he is a man who loved playing chess. He'd played chess since he was a schoolboy. And he then became a professional chess player. He got into the House of Commons. Chess is politics here. And he watched as Boris Johnson started playing chess as if his pawns were queens, as if his knights could move like bishops, as if he could just pick up a piece and plonk it anywhere he wanted on the board and claim not only that was allowed, but that was a brilliant move, one of the finest moves ever seen, a world-beating move. And what traumatises people like that is that they look around expecting their colleagues to go, you can't move a pawn 6 spaces diagonally. You can't do that. And he's expecting his colleagues to call it out. He's expecting the British media, he's expecting journalists, columnists, broadcasters to say this is not normal, you simply can't do that. But at the very least, they sat on their hands and said nothing. And at the very worst, they said this man is a chess genius, he's a grandmaster, he's up there with Garry Kasparov. Even Garry Kasparov didn't have the imagination to move a pawn 6 spaces diagonally across the board to knock the Black Queen out of the picture. It's an utter abandonment of basic truth. And that's what's brought us to this. And the people who want Boris Johnson to come back are not ready yet, and possibly never will be, to remove themselves from the teat of dishonesty that he will keep pumping until his dying day. It's 10:49. It is 10:52, and feelings. I won't sing. There is a song, isn't there? Feelings. Usually not that interested in feelings on this programme. Always more interested in evidence, in opinions that are based on examinable and scrutinisable elements, something that I think the absence of probably hurried the political mess that we're now witnessing, that refusal by everybody really to either examine their own opinions and work out where they came from, or of pundits and interviewers to actually ask guests why or what's the evidence for that, what law is it exactly that you're looking forward to not having to obey, what evidence do you have that ever happened, where does that claim come from? But too late for all of that now. That those ships have sailed. So feelings, how do you feel as you contemplate the political landscape of the United Kingdom? Less than a month after Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget, and 6 years, just over 6 years after that Brexit vote, which delivered much of what has followed. How do you feel? My feelings are odd. I don't know how I feel. When I'm talking to you and I get on one, I feel angry and righteous. It's a very small slice of vindication, very small slice. Because there's no fun in being right. You spend 6 years wishing you were wrong. But what else? A deep sadness, actually, which I can't indulge too often on the radio. I can't, because it's not fun. And sometimes I guess we comfort each other, those of us who actually care about this country, as opposed to simply hating foreigners and passing that off as patriotism. Those of us who actually care about our children's futures, we need to support each other sometimes when those futures are being jeopardised by political decisions, democratically mandated political decisions, when liars like Boris Johnson are riding high in the House of Commons. Those of us who care about the truth have to comfort each other. But I can't let the sadness in every day. Not on the radio. However many witty one-liners you and I might be able to throw into the mix, you can't let the sadness in every day. But I'm letting it in today. Something about that phrase, Jeremy Hunt is coming to the rescue, saddens me almost more than the more obvious tragedies that we've witnessed in recent days. The idea that we are so diminished, not just as a nation, but the Conservative government in particular, is so completely diminished that they now have to turn to a man who is not only pretty useless, but is also the very embodiment of pretty much everything that the actual Prime Minister claims to resent within her own party. That's how broken it is now. Jim's in Spalding. Jim, what would you like to say? How are you feeling?
Morning, James.
Hello, Jim.
I've been through the stages of the process that I think you and your earlier callers, the anger, the frustration, and I'm sort of almost coming out the other side at the moment.
Good.
With some fairly naive or maybe even inebriate optimism in that I feel that Truss, Johnson and even May have put a very bright spotlight onto everything that's wrong with our political system. And I think we're approaching a chance to sort of wipe the Exo-sketch clean.
I want to join you in the foothills of optimism, Jim, where you are pirouetting this morning. I would love to join you, but then I remember the media, then I remember the newspapers. How long before they're back to gaslighting the population, back to pretending that anybody who is perhaps politically interested in redistributing some wealth from the very top to the rest of society is some sort of communist or Marxist? I don't know that I can join you yet, but I would like to.
Well, I think my optimism is more sort of medium-term based in
Yes.
that we've got 2 years for this mob, whoever they put at the top to brighten the spotlight on everything that's wrong. And,
yes,
we have the possibility of moving to a system that doesn't have first past the post, doesn't have corruption, doesn't have lobbying, doesn't have think tanks, doesn't have whipping. And
you're really pirouetting now, Jim.
Oh yeah,
aren't you? You're really dancing now. So I think I'm more. What's the word? More prosaic than you are, and so I'd pick one or two and just aim for them. I don't know that you're going to get rid of all of these cancers at the heart of our democracy in one fell swoop. And I'll tell you something else we haven't talked about. Whoever takes over, presuming that it's Keir Starmer sooner or later, you wouldn't fancy it yourself. It's another reason why my personal opinion of him is quite comforting, is that he is somebody who has a proper sense of public service, public duty, a director of public prosecutions, a man who would actually, even perhaps, relish taking over a country that needed desperate amounts of tender, loving care than a country that was doing well. I honestly think that's part of his makeup, that desire to actually fix a mess rather than to imagine one that needs fixing, or to just preside over a period of relative peace and I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit romantic. Jim, thank you. Adam is in Stoke-on-Trent. I'm hearing that this announcement of Jeremy Hunt's is to be delayed by 15 minutes, so we will take the 11 o'clock news and Theo will join me after that. It means I can squeeze you in, Adam. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
The anxiety that I've got leading into next year has somewhat overarched the anger that I've been feeling, and that I've started up my own gardening business this year. A hell of a year to try and start a business. Yes. And I don't know what's going to happen with my customers next year. Everybody's possibly having £4 or £5 or however many £100 more a month on the mortgages if they're no longer
not everybody. Everybody who needs to renegotiate their mortgage or renew their mortgage is going to be hit pretty hard in the pocket. And then there's the cost of living crisis. And then I'm hearing, and we'll wait for Jeremy Hunt's bill, but some of the help with energy bills may be on the way out come April. There may be a time limit on some of the help that is on the way with energy bills. So there are a lot of other demands on people's pockets, Adam.
Yeah, and so with gardening, it's something that most people would consider. Well, we'll save money where we can, and we'll just mow the lawn ourselves this year. And it's I've got some good customers, some really loyal ones that I've come to know this year that have said, yeah, we want your services next year because you're doing such a good job. But then equally, I've had a couple that have said, like, I'm really sorry, but we're having to tighten the purse strings and we can't afford you to come. So it's that thought that next year, I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got two little girls.
How much of it do you blame the politics for? Just on a very personal level, how much of it do you see? Because there's problems everywhere in the world. There are potential recessions on the horizon in many countries, many territories. We're going to get hit harder by many of these issues because of because we're not in the single market anymore is the simplest way of putting it. But the last 6 years, how much of what's happened in the last month do you blame Liz Truss for?
She certainly played her part in the madness, but it all leads from austerity through David Cameron. That I was one that voted to leave through an emotional decision. That let's be honest, that the whole referendum was brought about on people's emotions as opposed to and
well, your
side
on my
was emotion that I hated David Cameron. I've not seen a pay rise for years and various other things, and I used it as a protest vote, which I absolutely I wish I could turn back time, or at least
I completely respect what you did. You because not only did he campaign pathetically for remaining, but he also became a focal point for people like you to vote against the status quo. You ended up making the country poorer, but you thought that by getting rid of him, you might somehow reverse the policies of austerity and make the country or make yourself better off. You get no beef from me, Adam, for that sort of thinking. The effort put into persuading you to do what you did was absolutely huge, and the people on the other side of the argument were largely pathetic or absent. You have, however, made me late for this. It's 5 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, just imagine if you've had a long weekend away or you've managed to avoid social media or the news for the last few days, that may have come as something as a shock to you. Yes, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, the fourth in 4 months. What is it? Four chancellors in 1, 2,
four chancellors.
Four chancellors. Anyway, he's, as far as I know, he is still Chancellor of the Exchequer, although I think it's Theo's turn on Tuesday. He is imminent. His announcement is imminent, so we may cross live mid-banter to hear from the Chancellor about what he's going to do to, well, essentially, political editor Theo Usherwood, essentially undo all of the promises that Liz Truss made while campaigning to be leader of the Conservative Party, and then kept in Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget, will now be undone 3 weeks and 1 day later.
Can I read you a quote?
Yes.
Who said it? This is who said it last Wednesday. I am genuinely unclear as to what the Labour Party's policy is on our energy price guarantee. It was the biggest part of our mini budget. Are the opposition saying that they want to reverse it and that they want to see people facing energy bills of £6,000? Is that what the right honourable gentleman and learned gentleman is saying?
Was it Liz Truss?
It was.
Gosh. Keith, round of applause there, please. Thank you. Was it Liz Truss? Thank you.
Yes, it was. And of course, now we learn that Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor from next April, is actually going to withdraw much of the energy price guarantee support, which of course caps average bills at £2,500. and is going to bring in a much more targeted scheme because, of course, they need to cut the amount of money.
Not until April, though.
Not until April.
No, I don't want people to panic. They're all right for winter.
No, but the important thing, the point that Liz Truss was making was Labour's plan only went to next April.
That's right.
And she was saying, well, aren't you going to go much further? And now her Chancellor's saying, well, actually, we can't go much further for millions of people because we don't have the money to do so.
Oddly, I don't think that the energy help gets filed under emergency. It wasn't that spooked the markets. That would be like a furlough. That would be, here is a unique set of circumstances that they're going to spend a lot of money to deal with, but I don't see that they've got much choice. And Hunt now tinkers at the edges of it or reduces it in part. That wasn't what sent the market or the pound into freefall. That was the uncosted tax cuts. So why is Hunt doing this?
The borrowing was going to have to pay for the energy price guarantee of 150 billion.
But it was never going to be permanent, is the point that I'm making, whereas the tax cuts were. There's a difference between an emergency and an ideology.
There is, but there's still the same, that you still have to pay back the loan for the Lamborghini and the Porsche.
Yes, of course, I understand that. And that's why it was such an odd thing for her to do.
So you lump it together.
Yes. So he's turning down the payments on the Lamborghini and taking the Porsche back to the garage. He's giving the keys back on the Porsche. Yeah. If you weren't listening last week, this was one of the finest analogies in the history of British broadcasting, when I wondered, because Theo Ashwood never really joins me in expressing the vaguest semblance of an opinion. He's far too professional and impartial. But I didn't understand at PMQs all those years ago on Wednesday, I didn't understand why Liz Truss kept talking about the energy bill help that she was giving when the questions were about how she was going to pay for the tax cuts, because the energy bill was even more expensive than the tax cuts. So I suggested to Theo that it was as if we were married and I bought a Lamborghini. Or actually, I got it the wrong way around, because Lamborghinis are generally more expensive than Porsches. So I bought a Porsche, and Theo said to me, how the hell are we going to pay for that Porsche? And I responded by saying, oh, don't worry, I've also bought a Lamborghini. And there was a beautiful pause, a clip that went very viral, because eventually even Theo Ashwood had to admit that analogy was a perfect distillation of reality. Liz Truss was being asked how she was going to pay for a Porsche at Prime Minister's questions by Keir Starmer, and she responded by telling him that she'd also bought a Lamborghini. And why was he not talking about that as well? And here we are. Yes. So he's going to give back the keys for the Porsche, and he's going to try and renegotiate the payments on the Lamborghini.
Yes, maybe turn it into a rental.
No, let's not complicate it. He's just going to try and pay it off over 5 years instead of 2 years, or whatever it may be.
But the point is that actually...
OK, here it is.
For economic stability. This is vital for businesses making long-term investment decisions, and for families concerned about their jobs, their mortgages, and the cost of living. No government can control markets, but every government can give certainty about the sustainability of public finances. And that is one of the many factors that influence how markets behave. And for that reason, although the Prime Minister and I are both committed to cutting corporation tax, on Friday, she listened to concerns about the mini-budget and confirmed we will not proceed with the cut to corporation tax announced. The government has today decided to make further changes to the mini-budget and to reduce unhelpful speculation about what they are. We've decided to announce these ahead of the medium-term fiscal plan, which happens in 2 weeks. I'll give a detailed statement to Parliament this afternoon and answer questions from MPs. But because these decisions are market sensitive, I've agreed with the Speaker the need to give an early, brief summary of the changes, which are all designed to provide confidence and stability. Firstly, we will reverse almost all the tax measures announced in the growth plan 3 weeks ago that have not started parliamentary legislation. So whilst we will continue with the abolition of the health and social care levy and stamp duty changes, we will no longer be proceeding with the cuts to dividend tax rates, the reversal of off-payroll working reforms introduced in 2017 and 2021, the new VAT-free shopping scheme for non-UK visitors, or the freeze on alcohol duty rates. Secondly, the government's current plan is to cut the basic rate of income tax to 19% from April 2023. It is a deeply held conservative value, a value that I share, that people should keep more of the money they earn. But at a time when markets are rightly demanding commitment to sustainable public finances, it is not right to borrow to fund this tax cut. So I've decided that the basic rate of income tax will remain at 20%, and it will do so indefinitely until economic circumstances allow for it to be cut. Taken together with the decision not to cut corporation tax and restoring the top rate of income tax, the measures I've announced today will raise every year around £32 billion. Finally, the biggest single expense in the growth plan was the energy price guarantee. This is a landmark policy supporting millions of people through a difficult winter. And today I want to confirm that the support we are providing between now and April next year will not change. But beyond that, the Prime Minister and I have agreed it would not be responsible to continue exposing public finances to unlimited volatility in international gas prices. So I'm announcing today a Treasury-led review into how we support energy bills beyond April next year. The objective is to design a new approach that will cost the taxpayer significantly less than planned, whilst ensuring enough support for those in need. Any support for businesses will be targeted to those most affected, and the new approach will better incentivise energy efficiency. The most important objective for our country right now is stability. Governments cannot eliminate volatility in markets, but they can play their part, and we will do so, because instability affects the prices of things in shops, the cost of mortgages, and the values of pensions. There will be more difficult decisions, I'm afraid, on both tax and spending as we deliver our commitment to get debt falling as a share of the economy over the medium term. All departments will need to redouble their efforts to find savings, and some areas of spending will need to be cut. But as I promised at the weekend, our priority in making the difficult decisions that lie ahead will always be the most vulnerable. And I remain extremely confident about the UK's long-term economic prospects as we deliver our mission to go for growth. But growth requires confidence and stability, and the United Kingdom will always pay its way. This government will therefore take whatever tough decisions are necessary to do so. Thank you.
Short, but not very sweet.
No. So just to run you through the big changes, Jeremy Hunt announcing a reversal of almost all the tax measures announced in the mini-budget on September the 23rd. The document produced by Kwasi Kwarteng, his predecessor, it's been ripped up completely. So only those measures which have started their way through Parliament, namely, of course, the cut in national insurance contributions, will remain in place. Remember, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak put them up by 1.25 percentage points, both for employers and employees. That is staying, but the changes to IR 35, James, which of course are those employees who are off payroll, that's going. Also VAT shopping, free shopping for tourists visiting this country, a move designed to try and encourage people to visit the UK as tourists, that's going as well. The basic rate of income tax is going to stay at 20p indefinitely. The plan originally had been in 2024 to bring it down from 20p to 19 pence. Kwasi Kwarteng announced that from next April it would be brought down to 19 pence. Now, from what Jeremy Hunt has just said there, it's not going to happen at all. On the energy price guarantee, the cost originally was £150 billion. Jeremy Hunt saying that it's going to now cost significantly less than planned. What they're going to do is they're going to keep it in place. So it's a cap on average bills at £2,500 a year. They're going to keep it in place until April next year. That's the first 6 months. However, after that, they're going to come up with a review, a plan, so that it's more targeted, supporting those on lower incomes, whilst those on higher incomes obviously going to have to pay significantly higher bills. He also warned of more difficult decisions ahead, the Chancellor saying that some areas of spending are going to need to be cut, and that departments across Whitehall are going to have to find savings in order to bring to bring government spending under control.
I mean, wow.
Yeah, it's wow stuff. It's incredible. I mean, this is 2 weeks on, just over 2 weeks on now, from 3 weeks on even from the mini budget, and the whole thing has been ripped up, torn to shreds, and they've just started again. Apart from, of course, the national insurance contributions rise.
Are you familiar with Saint Augustine's prayer, Augustine's wayward prayer? Are you familiar with that?
No.
It is rather clever. Stephen Bush at the FT has done a variation on it. Augustine is supposed to have said, "Lord, make me pure, but not yet." And what we've just heard there from Jeremy Hunt is, "Lord, make me a tax cutter, but not yet."
And he's no time frame for making him a tax, and no time frame to making him a tax cutter. It's a complete volte-face on behalf of the government, and Liz Truss nowhere near.
I mean, she's finished.
She's done.
She has to be, because these are the promises that got her elected, which she then kept, and which Jeremy Hunt has now completed. And also, there's another train coming down the tracks, which is that the national insurance rise was designed to help social care.
Yes.
And now that's not happening, but social care is still in a state of crisis. And indeed, some of that money was being used to prop up some of the holes left by the impact of coronavirus on the NHS. So the money the cut that's going ahead is to the revenue-raising policy that was designed to help social care and the NHS.
Well, so this is what the government said at the time, and I'll keep it very short. The NHS, Health Department and Defence are protected.
Yeah.
Liz Truss said at the time, when she cut national insurance contributions or announced a cut to national insurance contributions, that the social care levy, £37 billion that's raised from it, won't go. So the commitment is still there to support the NHS. It was just going to be supported by borrowing, which was then in the longer term going to be paid off by, this was the theory anyway, the Trussonomics theory, was going to be paid off by a stimulated economy.
And the stamp duty cut is staying as well.
Yes.
So we'll see what that means shortly. You think you've got problems? I've got to get a phone in out of this. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. And if you're just joining us, the current Chancellor of the Exchequer has just undone almost everything announced under 4 weeks ago by the last Chancellor of the Exchequer. And what the last Chancellor of the Exchequer announced almost 4 weeks ago was essentially that all of the promises that the Prime Minister made in order to get herself elected leader of the Conservative Party, and of course by association Prime Minister, have been abandoned. I mean, this doesn't happen to me very often. I'm normally delighted to be live on the radio when events, dear boy, events unfold and occur. But I don't know what to know what to do or say. I don't know how to make sense of this. What time is it? 11:23, 37 minutes. I've got an hour and 37 minutes of the programme left. And how do you analyse this in a rational way? I mean, I'll say the words. I'll say all the right words, but not necessarily altogether now in the right order. Because it's the sheer scale of the craziness that is very hard to grasp, never mind articulate. So I'll tell you what, I'll try and explain it to you as if you'd been off recording an album in the Caribbean, and you'd cut yourself off from all news sources and all social media and all the rest of it, just for the last 4 weeks. That's all, just 4 weeks. Because you wouldn't even have, well, maybe a little bit longer. So anyway, look, Liz Truss was not very popular among her own MPs, but she was desperate to become Prime Minister. You could tell how desperate she was by the utterly screeching U-turn she undertook with regard to Brexit, which was, of course, an anti-growth vote in 2016, one of the biggest anti-growth votes in the history of democracies, actually. It's very hard to think of another vote undertaken by plebiscite that was more anti-growth than withdrawing yourself from a massive global trading bloc, the biggest free market in the history of humanity, and imposing extra red tape, imposing friction upon your own trade with your biggest trading partners. An act of immeasurable idiocy. Okay? And she understood that. But she abandoned that conviction and that belief after it was waved through and became a huge cheerleader for it. She achieved popularity among the membership of the Conservative Party, and this is something that's often overlooked, by making nonsensical claims about trade deals she was signing post-Brexit. So whether it was a complete rollover, a sort of cut and paste job from the trade arrangement that a country had with the European Union, which was then sort of segued into an individual trade agreement with the United Kingdom, sometimes watered down a bit, sometimes diluted, sometimes actually improved. The deal with Japan did contain some small elements that could have been construed as being even better than the deal that Japan had with the European Union. But it's actually seen a decline in trade because, of course, if you were importing stuff from Japan into a United Kingdom that was part of the single market, then you have a gateway to 500 million people. And we shut that gate. So we become less attractive as a trading partner, even as our trading agreement was arguably incrementally better than it had been as members of the European Union. So she was the only one, and this was, I suppose I have to use the word clever in the context of Liz Truss, which doesn't come easily, but she was the only one who kept claiming to the membership, and she seemed to understand before everybody else did how important these unidentified, largely elderly, right-wing men, almost all Brexiters, she realised how important they were a long time ago. And she was speaking exclusively to them when she was making nonsensical claims about trade deals with countries like Outer Mongolia and Vanuatu, claiming that this was somehow proof that Brexit had been a good idea. And that's why, if you remember, going back now 4 years or more, well, no, not 4 years. Going back 2-3 years, her polling within the party, which you probably weren't paying much attention to because we were so entranced by Boris Johnson's dance of the seven veils, we didn't really understand why is Liz Truss polling so spectacularly among Conservative Party members. That doesn't make any sense. You've seen her pork markets speech. You've seen the weird things that happen to her face when she's speaking to an audience. You remember the stuff about cheese. That is a disgrace. She's so obviously weird and incompetent. I cannot begin to understand why she is currently the most popular member of the cabinet among Conservative Party members. So we did what we always do on this programme, and we tried to work it out. And we did. It was purely and simply because everybody else was talking utter gibberish about Brexit in demonstrably untrue ways, like Boris Johnson claiming there would be no border in the Irish Sea, or some of the usual suspects still claiming that it was going to affect an increase in trade, while it would obviously and inevitably do the exact opposite, ignoring OBR forecasts of a 4% hit to GDP. They were all dancing around various deceptions and dishonesties, whereas Liz Truss was actually dealing in Brexit boosterism. She was saying, come and have a taste of this. Seriously, have a little bit of that. There's plenty more where that came from. Have this one on me. And she was pretending that her trade deals with people like Outer Mongolia and Vanuatu were things that A, couldn't have been done when we were in the European Union, which may in fact in some cases have been true, and B, crucially, that this demonstrated the brilliance, the wisdom, the genius of leaving the European Union. And that's why she started rocketing up those polls of Conservative Party members. The rest of us thought she was ridiculous. Still do, more so than ever. But among Conservative Party members, she was the Brexit Boudica. She was the one that was actually delivering things they could talk about at the golf club and say, well, we've got a trade deal with Outer Mongolia now, Derek. That's good, isn't it? Yeah, Brexit, yeah. The rest of us knew it was nonsense, but the rest of us don't matter. The rest of us didn't have a vote in the Conservative Party leadership election. So she gets on the ballot. All she has to do is make sure she's in the last two. And then the 80,000 people she spent the last 3 or 4 years very carefully grooming all vote for her because they think she's the only one that actually managed to deliver Brexit bonuses, Brexit benefits. You've got a better analysis of why anybody would ever vote for Liz Truss over Rishi Sunak. I'm afraid it's going to involve racism, isn't it? And that's no doubt part of it as well. But those polls that put her at the top were kicking in long before it came down to a two-horse race between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. So getting over the final line probably did involve a degree of racism, but getting over the line at all definitely involved a hell of a lot of Brexit boosterism, summed up by these ludicrous trade deals that she claimed were works of genius, works of diplomatic genius. And that is how she got to be Prime Minister. What happened next is even more remarkable and ridiculous, and we'll run through it after the very latest headlines with Holly Harris. It's 11:34 and the curious rise and fall of Liz Truss is entertaining us, if that's the right word for the moment. So we've explained how she became Prime Minister. A lot of people didn't notice that stuff about the Brexit trade deals. A lot of people didn't think it was important. Boris Johnson was telling much bigger lies at the time, but Truss's little lies, her sweet little lies, that's what groomed the electorate. And the electorate, remember, is Conservative Party members, largely retired Brexit enthusiasts, xenophobic, often, not always, just a very particular type of golf club bore. Generally, I mean, lots of exceptions to that rule, lots of lovely people, members of the Conservative Party. The ones that ring me are generally pretty lovely. The ones that would never ring me in a month of Sundays, precisely the people that Liz Truss was grooming. And it worked. She became Prime Minister. And this is where it goes absolutely crackers. I apologise for my weak vocabulary. I do not have the words. I don't like to use, I'm trying not to use words that may have connotations in the arena of mental health. So I might describe an idea, but not a person, as being crackers or bonkers. But I'm even trying not to use the word bonkers anymore. Weaning myself off it at this particular point in British political history is not easy. It's like trying to give up smoking during a divorce, I think. But I don't have the words to describe what is happening. So what I want to say now is, and this is the point where things really went, and all I've got is crackers. Crazy.